Let's just jump right into the relief plan that is being considered, the American Rescue Plan. And will you, in your own words, tell me what you believe the goal of this expensive and sweeping package is to help Americans, and particularly those in the Hoosier state?
Sure. The goal of this plan is to do something that really hasn't occurred yet. That's to get American families, American communities, and American businesses to the other side of this crisis so that we can finally launch a robust, inclusive, racially equitable economic recovery. Heretofore, we have not been able to do this. That has to do with some lack of coordination between Washington and the rest of the country in terms of virus control and vaccine distribution. It has to do with a kind of spotty record in terms of the continuous provision of relief to the American people throughout the pandemic. We have to put that behind us. You said that this is a sizable plan, and you're right, but it's not too big. In fact, the danger right now is not doing too much, it's doing too little. And I would argue that's one of the reasons we remain in the position that we're in now. This plan, the American Rescue Plan, was calibrated to be of the magnitude to finally deal COVID-19 a knockout blow and get us to the other side of this crisis.
This has been long said that the COVID pandemic is not only a health crisis, but an economic crisis. And if you get a hold on the health crisis first, the economic crisis will then fall into place and alleviate as well. Talk a little bit about that philosophy in this plan, because one of the pillars of this plan is to mount that national vaccination effort that is now underway.
So fundamentally, the premise for your question is exactly correct. There will not be a robust, lasting, inclusive, equitable economic recovery until we gain control of the virus and successfully distribute and produce the vaccine, make sure shots are getting into arms, not just of the privileged who often find themselves at the front of the line, but everyone who needs a vaccine. And that has long been the goal of the administration, even before we took office. And in fact, one of the, I think, key logistical challenges here is prior to our administration taking over, the attitude towards states and localities was, good luck, you're on your own. That's not the view from this White House. It's much more of we're in this together, and we want to make sure that states and localities have the resources they need to do this, that schools have the resources they need to reopen. And those resources are absolutely in the American Rescue Plan. I want to be clear that getting to the other side of the crisis is not the completion of the Biden-Harris administration goals. In fact, it's the beginning. Getting to the other side of the crisis sets us up for a much more robust and equitable economic recovery on the other side of the crisis. And that gets into the Building Back Better, or the recovery agenda, which is next in train. But you have to get there first, and that's what the rescue plan does.
One of the other pillars that's part of the plan here is delivering immediate relief to families. And so part of that is providing $1,400 to every member of a household and getting that out to them immediately. So why $1,400? How did the Biden administration arrive at that number? And what are you hoping families and individuals do with this money? What would make it most effective to help?
Yeah. So $1,400, if you add that to the $600 that came out of the December package, which passed last December, that's of course $2,000, and that's the amount that the political system had been talking about in terms of checks. And we got very positive results from people who recognized that was what it was going to take for them to keep a roof over their head, to make sure they meet their nutritional needs. So this is very much calibrated to the extent of need in the economy. And there's been a great deal of focus on the 2,000, and that's something that the president has been very solid on ever since he ran for office. I think the other parts of this that don't maybe get enough attention, it's also relevant to your question, is who gets the checks. And some of these families will start seeing checks with incomes of say 70,000, 80,000, even 100,000. And one of the reasons that's so important is that many of those families have faced significant hardship. I think sometimes in this country we think that, if you're poor, you're in trouble, and if you're middle class, you're fine. There are a lot of middle class families who have struggled throughout this pandemic. Many of them are accumulating, for example, really deep housing debt. And one of the things we can help them do with their checks is meet these piles of debt that some of these families are accumulating.
Do you think that's enough in the long run, though? Just $2,000 as we look out into the future?
Obviously, $2,000 is not going to help you make ends meet for the duration of your working life. I mean, everybody knows that. And I think the key thing there is that the rescue plan gets the economy to the other side of the crisis and finally launches a recovery that will deliver earnings opportunities to people who've heretofore been left behind. We know that based on economic analysis that the plan is predicted to add 4 million more jobs than would otherwise exist. It's supposed to get us to a lower unemployment rate about a year earlier than we would otherwise. So the idea is not to essentially, pad people's wallets forever. It's an American rescue plan. It's designed to get them to the other side of the crisis and to a situation where they can once again be able to pursue their economic vision, their dreams, their potential. That's what's in the plan.
One of the big issues that we're seeing here in Indiana and in Indianapolis, and you mentioned it briefly when you talk about housing, but it's this kind of conflict and tension that is building between landlords and their tenants, especially when it comes to eviction. So does any part of this plan provide any kind of relief for the landlords as they're called upon to, have an eviction moratorium, or help for renters to make those rental payments?
Exactly. It does, to the tune of 25 to 30 billion. And it's precisely for the reasons you just said. If you think about an eviction moratorium, which of course we've had and which the president is extending, that's a moratorium. That doesn't mean that your rent disappears. It means that you are, and this is what I was just referring to, it means that you're accumulating rental debt that you're going to have to meet at the other side of the crisis. And you can't just wipe that away because, as you correctly pointed out, there's a chain of people behind that rent, including not just landlords, but many landlords have to pay their own mortgages on the buildings that they've rented. So you can follow this chain all the way back to the financing of the housing market. And the anti-eviction plan provides the resources to meet that pile of housing debt. We've helped keep people in their homes, whether it's through mortgage forbearance or these eviction moratoria, but those debts will come due. And the American Rescue Plan helps not just keep roofs over people's heads, but helps support that chain of the whole financial chain of home ownership and of rentals.
And how easy is it for people to access that?
Well, I think it's going to have to be a really important part of the plan because, and it's an interesting thing. I used to be Joe Biden's chief economist when he was the vice president. And at that point, he was the implementer in chief of what was called the Recovery Act back then. That was the relief or stimulus plan that was in the mix back then. And he was on the phone with mayors and governors and housing authorities to make sure that the plans were not just signed in Washington and then we washed our hands of it, but that the plans were handily implemented. And I think you raise a good point on the housing part, because we have to make sure that local housing authorities get these resources to people so that they can get to landlords, and that this whole chain is kept in place. And that's very much an important goal of the president, who recognizes that implementation, without implementation, the plans just can't possibly provide the relief people need.
In reading through the details of the plan here, part of it is also geared to small businesses in communities and helping to prop them up. Tell me why there's such an emphasis on businesses owned by people of color in this plan.
Yeah. That's a great question. It's something that the president used to ask his team about during the campaign. We'd get on the phone and we'd be talking about these business plans, the Paycheck Protection Act, and all these various plans to help businesses survive. And his question was, what about the moms and pops? What about the small businesses? What about the entrepreneurs of color? And the reason he was asking that is because he was hearing, and he's been in this business a while, so he kind of has a good antenna for this sort of thing, that if you were one of these businesses that could call your bank, get your banker on the phone, you'd get a loan the next day, and it would be a hefty one. But there are a lot of businesses, many of whom are owned or run by entrepreneurs of color, that don't have that. They don't have that privileged place in the queue. So the emphasis was not on just putting, I think, something in the neighborhood of 20 billion in the plan for small businesses, but it was making sure, just like the housing conversation we were having a second ago, making sure that these businesses could access. And that means minority deposit institutions. It means it's called CDFIs, which are institutions which make sure that undercapitalized neighborhoods get the relief and the help that they need. It means working through local institutions that will make sure they get the water to the fire. I can do one more if you want.
One of the viewers put out a call for questions from folks, and one of them said, what could be available to help older Americans who might be taking care of their older parents who are opting not to be in nursing homes? Is there any kind of relief, financial relief for people who are serving as care providers for their older relatives?
Absolutely. There not only is there paid leave, so people can take a break from work if they need to do so, and provide that care. There's considerable tax credits for people, particularly lower income people with kids, to make sure that they have the resources they need to get through this. And I think most importantly, again, is getting back, is helping people get back to work so that they can once again have the incomes they need to provide. At the same time, we have to recognize that in many of our senior facilities, for example, people simply haven't had access to the virus control protection as well as vaccine that they've needed. So that is in the plan as well. I think one of the most important pieces of relief, though, for what the group that you're talking about, are going to be these direct impact payments, these checks. 2,000, if you can combine December with this plan, the American Rescue Plan, $2,000 checks for families that start at the bottom of the income scale and go up to north of $100,000. So we're reaching a lot of families. It's one of the biggest parts of the plan. And I think that kind of relief should help them get through to the other side of this.
Biggest hurdle, in your opinion, of seeing
this is going to be the last question, okay?
Right, this is it. The biggest hurdle that you think is in place in getting this passed?
Well, I think the key thing there is for Washington to recognize just how broadly this plan is supported outside of the Beltway. So we have these partisan squabbles. A good example is the state and local relief that we talked about a minute ago. If you actually talk to governors and mayors, they've been signing letters. 400 governors and mayors recently sent us a letter saying, we need this help, we need this relief. There was a poll result out today that said that over 70% of the American people recognize the urgency of this plan. And it was, by the way, over 50% for self-identified Republicans. There is a tremendous amount of bipartisan support because these issues are not Republican or Democratic issues. If you want to reopen schools, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. If you need relief to get to the other side of this crisis, it doesn't matter whether you're an R or a D. If you want to make sure that the virus is controlled and that the vaccine is distributed, that cuts across party lines. So I think we have to put aside any partisanship and get this over the legislative goal line as quickly as possible in Washington so we can get relief out to the rest of the country.
Jared, I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.